Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. Those who have been following along the last 2.5 weeks, it's been pretty awesome. We're tackling the issue of ocean plastics, learning from scientists, explorers, adventurers, conservationists, various advocates and groups, as well as artists, to learn about why it's a problem, what's happening, and what people are doing to combat the issue. So along those lines, I'm really excited today to be joined by Nicholas Mallos. He's the director of the Trash Free Seas program at the Ocean Conservancy. He oversees their work on ocean plastics, including its annual International Coastline Cleanup, scientific research portfolio, and the Trash Free Seas Alliance. So this is a cooperative group of businesses, leading environmental organizations, and scientists focused on developing solutions to address ocean trash. Nick also has extensive field experience researching ocean plastics, and it's taken him all over the world, from the North Pacific Gyre to the remote shores of Alaska and the Philippines. So Nick, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to learn a bit more about what you do and some of your research.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And it's a pleasure to be here speaking with everyone today. It's a great privilege, and so excited to see so many people engaged and interested on this really important issue of plastics in our ocean. As you said, today, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the problem, the impacts of plastics in the ocean, and then just talk a little bit about some of the things that we do at Ocean Conservancy. But more importantly, talk about some of the things that all of you can do in your everyday lives to not only reduce the likelihood of plastics getting in the ocean, but also clean up our beaches and waterways and keep the ocean a healthier place. So just want to make sure everyone can see the screen okay. Joe, is looking good on your end?
We got it, nice and full screen.
Excellent, perfect. Well, first, I'm going to start with why do I do what I do and where do I come from? I was in your seat many years ago, and this is a picture of me sitting on the beaches of New Jersey when I was just 2 or 3 years old. And from a very early age, I have absolutely loved the ocean and been fascinated by every aspect of the ocean. As I grew up, I very much wanted to be a professional surfer. That's what I would have loved to do if I had my choice and if I could have had any dream come true. But I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is a landlocked state. And while we go to the beach in the summertime, it's really hard to become a professional surfer. So I went for my second option in life, and that was to become a marine biologist and someone that gets to do a career of studying the ocean and learning about the ocean and teaching about the ocean. And so I had the great opportunity over the years to study animals like sharks and understand how they move and how they live. And over the years, I've spent time around the world. I've been very fortunate to be around the world. And everywhere I go, unfortunately, I have seen the plastics and other forms of trash on beaches and waterways. And so about 12 years ago, I was very fortunate to start working on the issue of plastics and trash in the ocean as a career. And I've been with Ocean Conservancy for almost 10 years now, leading our work on the issue of plastics and other forms of trash in the ocean. So today, we're going to spend the time talking about this issue, not just why it's a problem, but why we should be hopeful and why there are real solutions out there. And my takeaway for all of you is, regardless where you live, thousands of miles from the coast or on the beach, pursue your dreams, follow what really makes you happy. The world needs great scientists and great brains out there. So don't let anything or anyone say you can't do or become anything you want to. So as I said, today we're really going to focus on ocean plastic pollution and kind of looking at it from a global perspective and understanding what are some of the impacts of plastics on our ocean, and then talk about just briefly about a few solutions that are out there, and then really focusing on all of you. So I'll start with this picture here, and I'm going to ask all of you, if you ever heard about the floating island of trash in the middle of the ocean. I would ask all of you that have to raise your hand. And so what you see is a good number of you have heard about this floating island of trash, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Well, this is a picture I took from the middle of the North Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles of land in the heart of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And what you see is that it's actually not a floating island of trash twice the size of Texas. Instead, what we have is millions and millions and millions and trillions of pieces of little plastics and other forms of trash floating just below the water surface and up and down throughout the ocean, all the way to the seafloor. But that doesn't mean there's not a problem. And in fact, it actually means there's even more of a problem, because it's almost impossible to go out there and just scoop up this trash with a big net. And more problematic, what we see around the world is not floating islands of trash in the ocean, but mini islands of trash on land. And this is an image of a beach in the Philippines, thousands of miles away in the South Pacific, where we see lots of plastic bags littering the sand. We see other images of like this. This is a beach completely covered with trash in a fishing village in Indonesia. And then we see many communities around the world that have plastics littering their streets and their communities, and it makes for a very dangerous lifestyle for the people and the children that live there. And so while there are many forms of trash that pollute our ocean and litter our beaches, I'm going to spend the majority of my time today just talking about plastics, because we know that plastics are the most abundant form of pollution around the world. I also want to start just to make sure we're all on the same page, because plastics are a really incredible material. They're strong, they're cheap, they're lightweight, they provide clean water to people in times of emergencies and after natural disasters, like so many of the terrible hurricanes we've seen over the last few weeks and typhoons around the world. And they also allow us to do amazing things in terms of innovation with doctors in medicine and keeping people safe and healthy. But the qualities that make plastic so amazing, the fact that they're strong, they're very inexpensive, they're lightweight, are also the same challenges that make them so problematic when they enter the ocean. They last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They're inexpensive, so they're not really worth picking up if you're someone that makes a living off of collecting plastics and recycling them. And because they're so lightweight, they really easily blow into waterways and into the ocean across beaches, where they can be risk animals and marine environments. And so plastics are a valuable material, but when they end up in ecosystems and landscapes like this, they are very problematic for a variety of reasons. And we now know, thanks to the best available science, that roughly 8 million metric tons of plastic enters the ocean each year from land. 8 million metric tons. That is a massive number with lots of zeros. But to put that into perspective, so that we can all get our heads around that massive number, that equates to roughly 1 New York City garbage truck worth of plastics being dumped into the ocean every minute, every day, for an entire year. So we are talking about a crazy amount of plastics that are entering our ocean every year around the world. But there are other sources too. We also know that another big part of the ocean plastics problem is lost or abandoned fishing gear that finds its way into our ocean. So many times fishers will be at sea. It could be during bad storms. It could be during times when their gear gets snagged on rocks or other things underwater. And that fishing gear, those nets, those lobster pots, those crab pots, those pieces of equipment and gear get lost at sea. And that's when that happens, we call that ghost gear. And we know that almost 1 million tons of fishing gear gets lost at sea per year as well. And because fishing gear, when it's designed, it is done so to trap or entangle fish to then be sold to us to eat, when that fishing gear gets lost at sea, it continues to fish and catch animals indiscriminately. So it does not matter. It catches everything in its path. And we call that bycatch. And that has a really big impact on animals and fisheries and fishermen. And so how big are the impacts? What exactly is happening out there? Well, we know that more than 800 species of marine animals have been impacted by ocean plastic pollution. And these pictures are pretty hard to look at sometimes, but it just shows that how harmful these materials can be when they enter into the ocean environment. And we see animals across the board, all species of sea turtles, More than half of all whales and dolphin species in the ocean, more than half of all seabird species have all been found to be affected and impacted by ocean plastic pollution. And what you see on the screen is also just a list of the deadliest forms of ocean trash items that end up in the ocean. And as I just talked about, fishing gear is one of those really problematic forms. But then we see the rest of those items there being the types of plastic disposable products that we all use in our daily lives. And again, just to highlight what some of these impacts look like, sea turtles can get entangled underwater by fishing nets that then prevent them from being able to swim freely or eat. And some really terrible things can happen even on land, where things like sea lions or seals might be playing with a plastic band that they think is a toy, and it gets wrapped around their neck. And over time, as they grow, it starts to dig into their skin. So these images are really graphic, but I just want to show kind of the full range of impacts that can happen. And it's also important to highlight that it's not just the big stuff out there that is problematic for our ocean. This is a picture from the big island of Hawaii in the United States, and particularly from a beach on the very southern tip of that island, a place known as Camilo Point, or nicknamed Junk Beach, because years ago there was so much trash on this beach, it was piled almost 10 feet high, so as tall as a basketball hoop. Well, luckily, thanks to the great groups that work out in Hawaii, they've removed a lot of that trash and debris from the beaches. But I have that arrow pointing to what looks like sand, because what is still behind on the beaches of Hawaii, many beaches around the world, is what we call microplastics. So over time, when a bottle enters the ocean or another type of plastic enters the ocean, because of wind and waves and the sun, that big bottle or that big chunk of plastic will break up into smaller and smaller pieces. And what you see here is what those microplastics look like. They're very, very, very small pieces of plastic, many of these smaller than your pinky nail, but they pose a very real impact. And just to give you a sense of how many pieces of plastic were on that beach, in just a 1 square meter grid, we found more than 84,000 pieces of plastic just on top of the sand. So it's a crazy, crazy amount of plastic just on that one beach. And unfortunately, there are beaches like this around the world. And so I want to go from the beaches of Hawaii, thousands of miles away, on a personal journey with me to a place that's really the final away. And that's a place called Midway Atoll. And that is in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean. It's an island directly midway between the United States and Japan. And what's so incredible about Midway is that the island really belongs to birds. Midway is home to the largest nesting population of birds called Laysan albatross in the world. So more than 1 million of the birds you see on your screen here live on Midway. Only about 50 people live there. So truly, the birds own this island. And the albatross is an incredible bird. It stands about waist high to a human, so almost 1 meter tall, and is just incredibly social and just a beautiful animal to look at. You can see here, no concerns with reaching out and touching my hand. So the albatross is just an extraordinary animal. But the albatross also flies over the entire Pacific Ocean, thousands and thousands of kilometers at a time, feeding at the sea surface to eat squid eggs and other flying fish and other food. And as we've discussed on this presentation already, the other types of things that now float at the sea surface are plastics and bottle caps and other broken down fragments. And so unfortunately, on Midway, this beautiful paradise that I visited thousands of miles from people, you find very real impacts and visuals of how devastating and far-reaching this issue of plastic pollution in our ocean is. And this is one little bird that we found on the island, and this happens, unfortunately, to many birds, because after these young birds hatch, their parents feed around the Pacific Ocean, bring food back to them, and feed them, but these little birds cannot yet regurgitate or spit any of those bad plastics out. And so their bellies become full with plastics, they don't think they're hungry anymore, and they can unfortunately starve. And in looking at the stomach contents of one bird that had unfortunately died, just to see how many pieces of plastic were in there, this is what I found. More than 100 pieces of plastics in a very small, less than 1-year-old albatross. And you can see these are just crazy things that you find in there. Bottle caps, lots of small fragmented pieces, and even a 5-inch fishing float that was found in this bird's belly. So again, even at the most remote places on our planet, plastics are reaching their shores and having very real impacts. And so we have to take action. And if we travel thousands of miles away from midway from some of the most incredible birds in the world to the South Atlantic Ocean, we find some of the most amazing fish in the world and the largest fish in the ocean, and that is the whale shark. And whale sharks are filter feeders, and so they suck lots of water in just like whales and take all of the food that is in that water and eat it. And so we also know that whale sharks and manta rays and other filter feeders out there are also eating lots and lots of little pieces of plastic that then may stay in their bellies as well. And so we are really trying to understand, what does this all mean for our ocean food chain and for everyone that relies on that? And so here you see an image of the basic ocean food chain, starting with very, very small organisms all the way up to macro animals like sharks and whales. And we now know, thanks to amazing scientists around the world researching this issue every day, that plastics have been found in these really small phytoplankton, zooplankton, basically these very small creatures that are the building blocks of the ocean food chain. From there, we know that plastics have been found in small fish, up the food chain to larger fish, up the food chain farther to the biggest fish, and up the food chain to the top to things like sharks and whales. And so there's a real question now about, because humans are at the very top of the ocean food chain, are we actually eating plastics? And if we are, what does that really mean? And so many of the great researchers, some of whom have spoken on these webinars over the past few weeks, are researching these very questions. What potential impact does plastics in the ocean have on humans? So that's the bad. That's why it's a problem. But what can we do about it? And luckily, there are amazing people around the world working on this issue every day. And I am fortunate to work with a handful of those people at Ocean Conservancy as part of our Trash Free Seas program. And we truly believe that everyone has a role to play in solving this problem. There is no single solution. And one of the things that we have been doing for more than 3 decades is mobilizing individuals and concerned people around the world through our International Coastal Cleanup. And we just celebrated the 33rd annual International Coastal Cleanup on September 15th, but there are still cleanup events taking place around the world as we speak. And the International Coastal Cleanup is a global annual event that brings out people from all walks of life in more than 150 countries on a single day to pick up the trash they find on their beaches and in their waterways. And not only do they pick up the trash and keep our beaches and waterways a cleaner place, they also record all of the information they find on our official data form. And over the last 30 years, it has truly been amazing to see what ordinary people can do when we come together. More than 13 million people have come together over this time to remove 113 million kilograms of trash. And even beyond the weight of that trash, that's an amazing amount of weight, but more than 265 million individual pieces of trash have also been picked up. And it's not crazy stuff. We do find everything. We've even found kitchen sinks out there. We can literally find everything you can imagine on beaches and in the ocean. But for the most part, everything we find are the items that we are most familiar with in our everyday lives. So since the International Coastal Cleanup started in 1986, cigarette butts have always been the #1 item found. Many people don't think of cigarette butts as being made of plastic, but actually every cigarette butt has thousands of little plastic fibers in it. And so when you flick that cigarette butt, when people flick that cigarette butt, you're actually flicking thousands of little fibers that could ultimately end up in the ocean. The rest of the items you see there on that list are food wrappers, plastic beverage bottles, bottle caps, plastic bags, and straws and so on. So many food and beverage related items that most of us have used or use in our everyday lives. And in fact, over the course of the entire International Coastal Cleanup since 1986, which was before all of you were born, we have found more than 150 million items of the type of packaging and plastics you see on your screen there. And so what does that mean? How do we use that information that we have collected with millions of volunteers around the world and turn that into action? Well, we know that there are some plastic products, single-use plastic products out there that we can do without. Things like plastic bags or styrofoam food and beverage containers. These are products that we know have a very real impact on the ocean, and we know that there are suitable alternatives. So you can take a reusable bag with you. You can skip the bag altogether and maybe carry whatever you purchase in your arms. We know that many restaurants are picking alternative materials or different materials to use in their carry-out container so that it doesn't have any impact on the ocean if it happens to find its way onto the beach or into the waterway. And things like little plastic microbeads that are used sometimes in soaps and face washes that then get flushed down the drains. We know that there are things like clay or dirt or natural materials that we can use instead of those forms of plastic. So there are things that we can simply get rid of by passing laws or saying we no longer need that. But again, it all comes back to you as well, because individual choices make a really big difference. And so each of us in our everyday lives, we can do things like taking our reusable bottle with us. We can skip the straw when we go out to restaurants and say, no, thank you, I don't need a straw. We can take reusable coffee mugs or tea mugs with us or hot cocoa mugs. And we can always be sure to have a reusable bag in the car, on your bike, or at school with you, so that we don't have to use plastic bags that could maybe someday end up in the ocean and unintentionally choke a sea turtle. So you really are so powerful in your ability to change this problem around the world. And all of you can also go out anytime and participate in a cleanup. It doesn't have to be on the International Coastal Cleanup Day each year. It doesn't even have to be on a beach. You can go to your local park, your local river, or your local beach, because the ocean is always downstream. And one of the things Ocean Conservancy has is what we call our CleanSwell app. So this is a mobile app on both the Apple and Android platform that you can use and take with you. And every time you do a cleanup, you can log the items that you find in the app and then submit it. And that will go right into Ocean Conservancy's global database so that scientists and decision makers around the world can use the information you collect to inform the decisions they're making, or maybe even the laws they might be passing in your local communities. And also you get to keep track of your total impact on the ocean over the years and get rewarded with really cool badges like you see here to celebrate some of your accomplishments for picking up bottles or picking up bags or just going out and participating in a local cleanup event. So I encourage all of you to your brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, friends, tell them to download CleanSwell and take it with you and help make our ocean a cleaner place. And so lastly, I'll say all of you, as I said, can suit up to clean up. We celebrated the International Coastal Cleanup just 2 weeks ago on our annual flagship day, September 15th. But cleanup events are taking place around the world through the months of September and October. And so teachers, students, parents, you can go to suituptocleanup.org and find a cleanup location that might be taking place near you. And if one isn't happening, you can find details about how to organize your own community cleanup and use CleanSwell to contribute that information to the millions of volunteers around the world that are also participating in cleanups just like you. And so lastly, we have to wear and suit up many ways. I continue to surf in my own way these days, even if it's not as a professional surfer, sometimes wearing a suit, sometimes wearing flip-flops. But it's been an incredible ride, and at Ocean Conservancy with many of our partners around the world, we truly believe that we are turning the tide on ocean plastics, and we all work towards trash-free seas. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite books, my favorite quotes of all time, and that's the Lorax, because unless people like you care a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. Simply, it's not. And with that, I would be happy to spend the rest of the time answering questions about anything pertaining to ocean plastics or ocean conservation. And I really appreciate all of you tuning in and taking time to listen to a little bit about what Ocean Conservancy does for ocean plastics. Thank you so much.
All right, Nicholas, thank you so much for sharing that great presentation with us. I have no doubt the students learned a lot, and that app you shared at the end is really cool. So I hope some students will download that, get out in their communities, and collect some plastic, some trash, and keep it away from our waterways. All right, well, let's meet some of our live classrooms because they've got the questions for us. So let's see. Let's get started in Calgary, Alberta. We've got Mrs. Abbott's class. They're grade 6 students. Let me turn their microphone on.
How much of the ocean is covered by garbage?
So that is a great question. How much of the ocean is covered by garbage? And what's your name?
Matthew.
Hi, Matthew, and hi, everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for tuning in today. How much of the ocean is covered by garbage? So it's really hard to answer how much of the ocean is covered in garbage because the ocean is constantly moving. Plastics are very light and float, and so they're always swirling around and moving up and down in the ocean and around the ocean. And so can't answer how much of the ocean is covered in garbage, but what we do know is that when scientists go out on research boats and do what are called trawls, so they drag nets behind their boats and see what they collect in their nets, they almost always find plastics. And so what we know is that regardless of where you are in the ocean, whether it's the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, or even in the Arctic, we almost always find plastics. And so we know plastics are everywhere. It's even inside Arctic sea ice. And so we don't know how much is covered, but we do know almost no corner of the ocean is any longer free of plastic. It's a great question. Thank you.
All right, let's jump to our next classroom. This time we have Mrs. Kopenick's group. They are grade 4 or 5 students joining us from Morgan Hill. And I'll turn their microphone on. How are we doing, 4 or 5s? Question.
Hello.
If we donate, what will happen?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
If we donate, what will happen with it?
If you donate, what will happen to it?
To the Ocean Conservancy.
So, well, thank you very much for your question, and thank you all of you for listening in today. So if you donate, first of all, that's very generous. Thank you very much. But we use that money to then support all of our staff that work at Ocean Conservancy, and more importantly, to provide resources and materials to our partners around the world that do things like the International Coastal Cleanup and that organize cleanup events. And so we're really lucky to work with partners in more than 100 countries around the world. And when those people are doing cleanups, there's oftentimes the materials they need, information we share with them. And so the money that very generous members of Ocean Conservancy provide helps us do our work and keep the ocean a cleaner place.
All right, thanks for the question. Let's go to Mrs. Adrozny's group. They're in Bristol, Connecticut. Looks like some grade 5 students. Let me turn their microphone on. How we doing, boys and girls?
All right, Carlos, go ahead.
Have you ever found like a full tackle kit in the ocean?
So I think, Carlos, hello, I thank you everyone for joining. I think your question was, have I ever found a full tackle kit in the ocean? Was that correct?
Yes.
So I haven't ever found a full tackle box. I know through the International Coastal Cleanup, people have found tackle boxes, but I used to live in North Carolina for many years on the beach. And many times I would be walking the beach in the morning looking for sea turtles, and you would find a long piece of fishing line with a hook or a lure on it and maybe a bobber. And so I've never found an entire tackle box, but we definitely find lots of different forms of fishing gear that someone was fishing with. Maybe the fish put up a big fight, the line snapped, and sometimes that washes back onto the beach. Sometimes it stays in the ocean. So it absolutely is something we do find in the ocean. Awesome question.
So Nicholas, just to add on that, being in Oregon now, do you ever find things on the beach that you can clearly tell have washed right across the ocean and then onto the shores?
That is a great question, Joe. And yes, I do. And not just in Oregon, but particularly some of those pictures I showed from Hawaii. Because the way the ocean currents move around the North Pacific Ocean, I have found many things like bottle caps, cigarette lighters, beverage bottles that have Asian characters on them. And thanks to the incredible technology like Facebook and social media, we can reach out to our colleagues and friends across the ocean in places like China, South Korea, and Japan, and identify what those brands are and identify which countries they most likely came from. And so we are connected with one ocean, and regardless of where we are, debris and trash travels. And a bottle that may enter the ocean in Africa could end up on the beaches thousands of miles away in a place like Iceland or Canada. So we have to ensure we keep our local beaches clean so that our global ocean remains trash-free.
All right, let's swing into another live classroom. This time we're going to go to North Bay, Ontario. Mrs. Larmer's class, grade 5-6 students. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, North Bay?
Hey.
All right, Kaden.
What's it like being on CNN?
It can be a little, it's probably like being on camera right now with you. What's it like being on camera? Sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking. It makes you a little nervous, but oftentimes you just try and forget the camera's there and answer questions just like I'm doing now. To be honest, I'm way more nervous talking to all of you than I am when I'm on CNN. So it's very lucky to be on CNN, but even more lucky to get to work on this awesome issue and work on the ocean every day.
All right, let's swing to Mrs. Norman's class. They're joining us in Markham, Ontario, grade 7 class. We'll turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade 7?
Hi. Hey.
It's okay. Do I have to say it? Yes. Yeah, you are. So why did you decide to talk about plastic instead of garbage?
That is a really great question. And actually about 10 years ago, when we used to talk about this issue, people used to use the term marine debris or trash most commonly. And over the years, what we've seen, and by we, I mean the scientists around the world that work on this issue, is of all the items of trash that are on the beaches and in the ocean, the majority of them, more than 90% of everything you find, is made of plastics. And we also know that when it comes to impacts, like some of those awful images I show, things like paper or things like glass or things like aluminum, when they enter the ocean, they can pose an impact to animals, but oftentimes they might wash to the bottom. Glass will eventually turn back into sand. And things like aluminum also will erode, or they'll turn into artificial habitat. So we still don't want those items in the ocean, and they are trash. But when we think about the most problematic forms of trash entering our ocean, it is plastics. And so we now commonly refer to it as ocean plastic pollution. Good question. Very important question.
All right, let's take a swing back through our classrooms and see who has a follow-up for us. So we'll start off in Mrs. Abbott's class in Alberta again. Oh, maybe I didn't turn their mic on. Let's try again. Oh, here they come.
Hello. How big was the biggest garbage you saw in the ocean?
So I think you said how big was the biggest garbage I saw in the ocean?
Yeah.
Like the largest piece?
Yeah.
So the largest single item of trash I've ever seen in the ocean was half of a car. So car bumper, the outer frame, the wheels weren't on, but I found that floating because it must have been made of fiberglass or something lightweight. The largest ball of trash or debris I've ever found is what we call kind of a net ball. And so over time, fishing nets, ropes, and fishing line that are in the ocean can get entangled with one another and become this massive ball. And we saw a ball in the North Pacific Ocean that was bigger than your entire classroom. So you can see really large items of trash out there, and you think about something that big, it doesn't matter if you're a blue whale, the largest animal on the planet, something that big can still very seriously impact or hurt you.
All right.
Great question.
Back to Mrs. Kopenek's group. Your microphone's on.
What is the biggest way to stop pollution?
So the biggest way to stop pollution would be as individuals. So for all of you, it's every day trying to think about some of those alternative things you can do that reduce the amount of plastics you might be using. But if you're gonna use plastics, which is absolutely okay, as I said, plastics are a really great material when used right, making sure we're recycling when we can, making sure you're reusing products when you can, and if something does need to go into the trash can, making sure it gets all the way to the trash can and doesn't have the chance to blow out or litter into the waterways. So as individuals, we can all play a really important role. As we think about what we can do on the global scale, governments can pass laws that help us prevent the amount of materials that might be getting out there by eliminating certain products. And then companies can think about how they're packaging their products to ensure that if any of those materials might end up in the ocean, they don't pose a risk or impact to the animals and habitats that live there. So really important question, but as I said, it all starts with you.
All right, a really good point. And this morning in another event, we were talking about the 3 R's. Everybody knows reduce, recycle, reuse. But our guest this morning added the 4th, which is refuse. So when you can, turn it down.
Right on.
All right. Let's see. Mrs. Adrosny, your microphone's on.
Go ahead. Is it scary finding garbage?
I think I heard the question was, is it scary finding garbage? Is that the question?
Yes.
So it's not so much scary finding it most of the time, but sometimes on some of those pictures I showed you, on some beaches around the world when we're doing surveys or collecting data, unfortunately the trash is so deep that you often can't see the beach you're walking on. And so you can step on items, you can roll your ankle, there's sometimes needles and other sharp objects out there that you can cut yourself on. And so it's less scary than I would say it is sometimes dangerous. But ideally, it'd be awesome if we went to beaches around the world where there is no trash and we don't have to collect trash or do cleanups, because that's the real measure of success, not having any more pollution to clean up out there. But really good question.
All right, swing back to Mrs. Larmer's class, back to North Bay.
Hi, Maria. And what's the most affected animal in the sea that's been affected by all the plastic and garbage?
Yeah, that is a really good question and a difficult one to answer because compared to other forms of ocean science, we really are just learning a lot about the issue of ocean plastics. What I can say is that we know sea turtles and seabirds are heavily impacted by plastics because of the way they feed. And the scientists out there, we now know that all 7 species of sea turtles around the world have been impacted by plastics. And it's also believed that 100% of all sea turtles living in the ocean at some point in time eat plastics. So I would say if I had to pick one animal that gets exposed to plastics most often in the ocean, it would probably be the sea turtle.
All right, and one more trip to our final class, Mrs. Norman's class. Your microphone is on.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, hi. My name's Jake. Hi.
Hi, Jake.
Fish die per year. That's a plastic.
You cut out there. Was it how many fish die per year because of plastic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't, because it's really challenging to understand that, because when an animal is found with plastics in its stomach, you can't always say for certain whether or not it died because it had plastics in its stomach. Sometimes you know because maybe its stomach ruptured or there's a clear sign of how it died, but we don't always know that. The other problem is there are hundreds of millions of fish in the ocean, and we just don't know how far and wide fish are impacted. So I would say if that's a question you have and you're interested in oceans, there is absolutely a career and research opportunity available for you to pursue that. So it's a great question, and sometimes you just have to say, I don't have the answer.
And that's a really good answer, because we really see what washes up on shore, but if you think about how big the ocean is, it's really hard to get that complete picture.
Absolutely, Joe.
All right. Well, boys and girls, first of all, thank you as always for tuning in, and thank you for the great questions. Nicholas, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. You're doing great work with Ocean Conservancy. And yeah, we appreciate you spending the time hanging out with us today.
It was my privilege. Thank you all for tuning in, and thanks for having me. It was great. All
right. Well, let's turn the microphones on. Boys and girls, get loud. Thank you and goodbye. And we'll sign off for today. All right. Awesome. We've got a few more plastic events coming up. Hopefully we see you all soon. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thank you. Bye-bye.